I'll just start by letting you know, giving you a little bit of context, that this conversation that we're going to be having this morning emerged from our work. Becca and I, our conference co-chairs, emerged from our work on the conference planning committee as we recognized that there were distinct components of work related to congregational song in Canada that we really wanted to be able to intentionally address, and we wanted a space to do that beyond the plenaries and the festivals. So we developed this conversation for this conference and put together a group of panelists that we're just so excited about. So we'll just take a moment now to introduce ourselves and a little bit about our context that we come from. So my name is Anneli Loepp Thiessen. I'm a PhD candidate in music at the University of Ottawa on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. I work with music and worship in the Mennonite context, and currently I'm writing my dissertation on women's experiences in the Christian music industry. Pass it over to Becca.
I don't know if I need to look at this. My name is, it's kind of like that. Anyhow, my name is Becca Whitla, and I live in two places, in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Can you all say that, Saskatchewan? Yeah, thank you. Which is Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. And I also spend time in Toronto, as it's also known to Toronto. And in Saskatoon, I teach worship and preaching at St. Andrew's College, a small United Church college there.
My name is Oroyadeka in Mohawk, means burning sky. My name is Jonathan Maracle in English. I live in Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. Land of the Peacemaker. It's between Belleville and Kingston. I travel worldwide singing Indigenous style music that I write personally about the things that I feel that the Creator wants me to share. And so I'm here today to be a part of the panel because I'm bringing the Indigenous connection.
My name is David Buley. I'm here from Boutda, which is sometimes known as Newfoundland, traditional homelands of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq people, and the area of Labrador is home to Innu and Inuit from Nutassinan, Nunatsiavut, and Nunatukavut. I've been lucky to go to Newfoundland to teach at Memorial University, teaching music education, and do some work with a church in the city as well of St. John's. This is really loud. And love singing, as you may know, and been singing for a long time. So hopefully bring a sense of why we're all here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Matthew Boutda. I'm executive committee serving on the executive committee as a member at large. I'm also a church musician in Toronto, Treaty 13 of many nations, Mississaugas of the Credit being one. Also incoming doctoral student in choral conducting here at McGill. Yes, McGill. And that's just a little bit about me.
On helps there. That's better. Good morning. I'm Deb Bradley. I am a longtime church musician, off and on through most of my life. I am a music educator. With my final degree is from the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education in sociology, with an anti-racism focus. And I live in Toronto. I work with my colleague here, Jason. He'll introduce himself in a moment. And that is also Crown Treaty 13, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas of the Credit.
Good morning, everyone. Jason Locke. It's a pleasure to be here with this esteemed panel as well. I have the pleasure of serving as the Minister of Music at Islington United Church on the west end of the city, where, as Deb mentioned, she and I get to do some work together, which is a real joy. I got to that job through an interesting pathway of working in several denominations. I grew up in the Salvation Army. I worked for the Free Methodist Church of Canada and the Anglican Church of Canada, and now I'm in the United Church of Canada. And who knows where I'll be next, but I'm enjoying where I am. I'm enjoying where I am, okay? That's enough about me.
We just want to start by giving a little bit of context for those of you who maybe this is your first time in Canada, or you're less familiar with our Canadian congregational landscape. One of the significant realities faced in Canada, which is certainly not unique to Canada, is a decline in church participation. But we also recognize that this is perhaps more significant in Canada, this decline, than what we see in the US. The research kind of on this varies, but a 2020 poll found that 48% of Americans say religion is very important to them, and that was only 24%, or half, in Canada. The same survey found that only 15% of Canadians attend a religious service weekly, while that's 36% in the US. The percentage of Christians, people who identify as Christian, declined 14% between 2021 and 2011. So don't say this to put a damper on the conversation or to diminish the really incredible work that's happening in Canada, but just more want to paint a picture of the reality that we're making church music in as Canadians. We really hope that this week will also help to highlight the innovation and growth that the Canadian church musicians are helping to lead as well. Denominationally, Canada has a bit of a different makeup than our American counterparts. The Catholic Church is the biggest denomination in Canada, followed by the Anglican Church of Canada, which would be more similar to the Episcopalian Church in the US. And then the United Church of Canada is also quite significant, which is a more progressive liturgical denomination. Other groups like Pentecostals and Charismatics and Orthodox Christians, and obviously Mennonites, are also part of this liturgical landscape. One of the realities of this declining church attendance has been a significant reduction in denominational support for worship and liturgy, with especially particularly little support for church music. The impact of this decline can also be felt at the level of higher education. We have only a handful of undergraduate church music and worship programs, most of which are shrinking, and it's actually only at Emmanuel College at the University of Toronto that you can do a Master's of Sacred Music. And I'll turn it over to Becca.
So as we planned for the conference, we were aware of the fact that we were doing the conference here in Montreal and at Montréal. And we wanted to bring sort of a bit of an awareness of this context, as well as some representation here in the panel from across the country. And I feel self-conscious because I know there's a bunch of you from across Canada as well who could equally be here. So I want to encourage this conversation that we're beginning to continue throughout the conference among all of you. So here in Montreal, as you've noticed, French is the first spoken language. And there's a historic tension that I want to name between francophones and anglophones, as well as between La Belle Province, Québec, and the rest of the country. And this tension is rooted in historic conflict that resulted in a discrimination against francophones. There's also a proud and strong Québécois culture in this province. And I have to give a shout out here to friends Valérie and Maracle, who are doing a session tomorrow. You can maybe wave, there they are over there. They're checking my history to make sure it's correct, right? So good so far? Okay, good. So this culture has strong roots and also a movement of separatism. So there are lots of folks in Quebec who long for a separate nation that strongly identifies with culture from Quebec. So that has deep roots. And part of this complicated history includes a rebellion by Quebecers against the church. So secularism is strongest here in this province and this city. And that's because the church, particularly the Catholic Church, was identified with government and domineering powers. So people rebelled against it in the 70s. There was something called the Quiet Revolution that happened in the early 70s. So we wrestle with this bilingualism in the nation, and it's increasingly also complicated by multilingualism from the great diversity that we have in our cities. You will have heard perhaps about our Truth and Reconciliation process in Canada between 2008 and 2015. This is also something we wrestle with, and we wrestle with the 94 calls for action that came out of that. This was a response to residential schools, a government-instituted plan of schools that functioned through the churches to quote a former Prime Minister, take the Indian out of the child. So it was a project of state cultural annihilation. And churches now are wrestling with this and how to live into a pathway of healing with Indigenous siblings. What does that mean for congregational song? I'll just leave that hanging there. Another challenge in planning the conference, or any big Canadian city, or even small places actually, is wrestling with diversity. So there are multiple vibrant immigrant populations that are present. For instance, Toronto, where I spend half my time, is known to be the most multicultural city in the world. So how do we, as church communities and as song leaders, respond to this amazing mosaic of cultural diversity? How do we lift up the people's song? Who are the people in our context, in our communities, both inside church walls and right outside of church walls? And finally, there's a great geographic diversity, as well as large pieces of land that are sparsely populated. So that brings challenges to church music ministry and church ministry as well. Some of these challenges will be familiar to you from the USA context and from other parts of the world, but they have a particular flavor here, and that's what we wanted to talk about this morning, just to root ourselves in this place. You need this? Okay.
So we'll start our questions for our panelists here. We'll start with a question for you, David. Canada is a large country with a small population. In some communities, like out east where you live, there are strong regional differences that distinguish congregations. Many of these communities are very small and shrinking. We recognize the work that Canadians have to do with regard to addressing our unique relationship to colonialism and patriarchy, while also thoughtfully engaging in Indigenous reconciliation. What are the challenges faced by small communities in particular who want to do this work? And how is the work of curating thoughtful congregational song challenging in these small, regionally diverse communities?
That's a lot of question. And I have 2 minutes, yes. I think what I would do is simply tell a story, and that's related to deep-seatedness and passion for song. And I'll just give some context for that. I think that sense of curating things for our worship, I'm always wrestling with in terms of inclusivity, diversity, some of the languages that and words we use, and trying to be sure that the songs we sing are forming us rather than deforming us. So that's something to just carry, and I think that plays into the world of reconciliation as we struggle with the enormity of that. It also refers to inclusivity in various ways, not only cultural but gender inclusivity. But there's a deep-seatedness in some of these regions that we talk about, and so I'll just speak from the region where I come from, a place with 500,000 people populating the whole province. Half of that population lives in St. John's, and the other half lives throughout Newfoundland and Labrador, a massive region. Some communities very small. Place where I love to go, a place called Salvage, as a very small church, once would have had 600 people there, and now maybe has 8 to 10 people singing heartily the songs they love. They're deep-seated songs. To take away some of that deep-seated songs because it maybe doesn't feel appropriate anymore is a real challenge for the leadership. How to do that well. I don't know that I have an answer. And I just tell a story. This is not a story of congregational song, but a story of singing song that is deep-seated and deeply held. We have a national or a provincial anthem in Newfoundland and Labrador called the Ode to Newfoundland, and it's been sung in schools since the early part of the 20th century. Yeah, whatever century we're in, 1900s. It was written by a governor, so colonial governor of the province, and the words are passionately held. We love thee, smiling land. We love thee. A song about the beauty of the trees, a song about the harshness of the weather. We love the windswept land. We love the frozen land. But the last verse is, as once our fathers, so we loved, where once they stood, we stand, etc., etc. So there's this sense of patriarchy in this verse and a kind of colonial imposition there. Recently at the university where I work, at Convocation, this song has been sung forever, since 1949 when the university was formed. And 2 years ago, the president decided it will no longer be sung. This created havoc in the province. It was just kind of vitriolic angst about taking away this song that Newfoundlanders had been singing since before Confederation. We joined Confederation last, newest and coolest province, as one of our premiers says, and we're joined in 1949. So this song has been held in great love, and yet there are challenges in that song, in that verse, and challenges for people who've lived in that land long before colonialism, before the Westerners arrived. And yet taking it away is a conversation that is really hard because it's deeply seated and felt. So I guess in that curation idea, I think we must struggle, and we must try to find a way forward with conversation and with relationship, and to try to find the best way to resolve these issues. And I'll leave with this. I think one way to do that is through music that is loved. And what I try to do is find songs with texts, some of which are written by people in this room, which are beautiful, and maybe speak somewhere to the gospel. But I'll use a song that is loved in our province, maybe a folk song from home, from the region, from where we are. Somehow that is loved, and you can see people sort of swaying to these lovely melodies that we inherited. So maybe that's a way of curation. Maybe that's a way to be mindful about the conversations, to be mindful about what is loved, and to try to find a unity there. I don't know if that helps or not.
Anything to add from any of our panelists on that?
I have a prepared question here, but Jonathan leaned over to me and said, I already have enough to say in response to what you already said. So I'm just going to pass him the mic.
Okay. I believe that we're in a position, man, last night when I sat here and I listened to you guys respond in song, and you're all like learned musical scholars from what I could hear. You guys all knew where to go with your harmonies, and you knew what all the notes meant on the wall. And it was so beautiful. So I'm taken by that, and I love it. And I really believe that music in the church is the key to the breakthrough in Canada. I believe that all of you guys that have studied so hard to do this, there's a whole bunch of good that your studies have given you, but I think there might be some stuff there you need to let go of. Sorry, but that's just my opinion as an unlearned musician. So I need to say this. In the 90s, there was a very, very strong movement towards reconciliation between Quebec and the English-speaking people of Canada. And everybody knew the battles that were going on. And, you know, during that time, we had the Oka crisis. We've had all these different things that have taken place. And so this, within the church, there rose up this desire to build reconciliation, because that's the right thing to do. If you're the spiritual leaders of the land, you're going to raise up and you're going to say, let us reconcile. And so this whole thing started to happen, and these different people were calling these gatherings, and these leaders would stand up that represented Quebecois, and then there would be the people that would represent the Anglo or the English Canada, and they would ask for forgiveness on behalf of their people. And then the English would respond, give forgiveness, and say, will you forgive us for what we did, thus and thus, so and so. And this went on for some time without any acknowledgement of the indigenous people in the land. And you know that just right next door to this area is Ganawage, the Mercier Bridge, Gasoline Alley. Then you got the Oka crisis. So you guys are well aware of the things that have taken place. But then there was this idea, let's have a March for Jesus in 1995. And so the powers that be of the Quebecois Church, the powers that be of Anglo-Canada said, let's begin to pray and let's put together an album of music called the March for Jesus 1995. And so they started putting it together, and they had all these great worship leaders from Quebec. They had all these great worship leaders from across Canada. And they all started submitting their songs for this. And then somebody, I don't know who it was, but I'd like to pin a medal on them. They said, we're forgetting about the indigenous people. We're forgetting about that people group that was here before all of us ever came to fight over their land. Let's ask them if they want to do one song on the album. Yeah. Well, you know why the white men went to the moon, right? They heard Indians had land up there. So they asked, and guess what? It turned out to be me they asked. So I wrote a song. And it's in the 1995 March for Jesus. And they said that, you know, March for Jesus, big, how many of you recognize it? How many of you have ever been a part of it? I see a couple hands out there. Well, it was pretty amazing, because the reason and the purpose of it was right, because they wanted to stir reconciliation. And so I wrote my song for it, submitted it, it got accepted. Imagine that. And they said when they presented it across the country, they did it in all major cities across the country, that when the song started to play, it had different songs from the French side, it had different songs from the English side, and then that one lonely indigenous song came up. And they said during the other songs, everybody was just worshiping and so happy we were going to reconcile. And then this native song came on. And apparently they said that the people fell to the floor and cried out for forgiveness to God because they had forgotten. In all of their squabbling over stuff that wasn't theirs, they had forgotten the very people that they were supposed to be missionizing. I'm not saying this with bitterness, I'm saying it with passion. Because I love you guys. I am your family. I am one of you. I am not here in a sense of bitterness or pointing fingers. I am here because I believe we have what it takes to change Canada and the US through our music. I believe we need to start singing songs of freedom. We need to start allowing our singers and our worship leaders in our churches to not be bound up to the songs that are already written. But the Holy Spirit is speaking to our worship leaders, but they have been in chains because the pastors say, oh, you gotta sing songs that the people can hang their hat on so that they can come in and they can be all comfortable because they sing in all the songs that they've always sung. Baloney. I like what you guys are singing here. Nice memories. Nice memories. But where are we going with it? And how is it going to change Canada and America? It's going to change it when we listen to the Holy Spirit and our pastors and our churches and our denominations allow our worship leaders to begin to hear what the Holy Spirit is saying, and we begin to sing songs that are effectual to the moment that we're living in today. I'm speaking, I guess, prophetically in saying, I just pray that you guys will begin to allow those creative juices to flow and you'll say the things that you know need to be said and quit playing the game of religion. Yeah, that's due to a good applause, but you guys are all pretty holy here. I'm my father's son, and he had a history of saying what he felt on his heart. And I truly would love to hear you beautiful, learned musicians to write the songs that the people need to hear from the church. The church has been playing games, but they need to hear the songs that are in your hearts that are going to set the people free, because it's the church that's going to change the nation, and you guys are the core. You guys are the song of the church. Release it. Release it. Rebel on your pastors. No, sorry. I don't mean that. Reason with them. I do mean it. Okay, I do mean it. Reason with them. Sit down with them. Give them ultimatums if you have to. But sing the song that the Holy Spirit is giving you so that change can come. We've been riding this boat too long, and it's sinking. She gave you the stats. It's sinking. If we want to see it become a fleet, then start singing what the Holy Spirit is saying and release your congregations to walk in what God wants them to walk in.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Question for Deb.
You're going to make me follow that.
I know. Canada has been described as a cultural mosaic where communities maintain their culture rather than falling into a cultural melting pot. Increasing numbers of immigrants and refugees make Canada's religious landscape beautifully diverse. We also recognize that it can be complex to sing across cultural difference. How can Canadians respectfully and thoughtfully reflect this diversity in our congregational song? What guidelines should we follow to engage Canada's religious diversity well in our worship?
Well, thank you for those questions. I'm not sure I can address both of them. A lot of what I say sort of follows from Jonathan's eloquence, because a lot of what he just talked about actually applies to this situation of engaging global song in worship. Now, last night, it was a beautiful cacophony, if I may use that word, in lovely 4-part harmony all the way through, singing multiple languages to the same tune. And that was amazing. But how many congregations could actually do that or would do that, even if there was the linguistic diversity and you had the languages to present to them so they could sing? Not likely. And yet we have this compelling need to represent the people of God who live everywhere on this planet in our worship, right? So all we can do is pick a few songs here and there. And as Jonathan mentioned, we're up against some mandates. We have the tyranny of time, worship, an hour and 10 minutes. That song has 6 verses. Let's cut it down to 3. Let's skip doing it in French. Let's not bother trying to learn the Choctaw because we can sing the English, or if you're in Quebec, we can sing the French, and we don't have to bother teaching it to anyone. So that's a real challenge that we face. And we might have all the best intentions, right, to learn songs from somewhere other than our own location. But then we have to teach the songs to the congregation. I think it's really easy to think we're doing God's work when we sing A Spiritual every Sunday in February. Or we bring in an Indigenous culture bearer on Indigenous Peoples Sunday to lead us in a song that has no specific text. And, to do that once in a great while, okay, maybe it has some very small positive impact. But as Jonathan said, we're in crisis here in the world. And we need to find ways to sing across all of that. Is there a practical solution? Well, I'm not sure how practical it is, but we here in this room who love song, who have the ability to easily learn music from just about anywhere, either with our ears and with our ears and eyes, if we read music, or our fingers, if we read Braille music, through sign language, if we don't have the ability to hear, but we can convey the songs and we can learn them. But then we have to teach them to our congregations, right? Because I think in my ideal world, every church service might look something like what we experienced last night, where we had songs from everywhere and people actually felt comfortable trying to sing in a language they don't know. Because I don't know about you, maybe this is unique to me, but when I hear a beautiful melody being sung in a language I don't know, it touches me in a different way. And that tells me that this is a way that God helps me understand something about someone I may have never met, may never meet. People from a place on the planet I may never get to see personally or engage with people personally. But somehow through that language, I get a feeling of what it might be like to walk in their shoes for a minute and a half while we sing a song. So I guess that's my bit of practical info, just learn as many songs as you can and be brave and teach them and use every opportunity and push back against clergy who say, we have to do, I don't want to name any particular hymn, but but we have this other song from Zimbabwe or from the Mohawk Nation or from Korea that says the same thing. It has that theological basis. It teaches the message that we want the people to go away with today, to think about over the week as they live their lives. And we need to build that repertoire and then use it and not just save it for Asian Heritage Month or Black History Month or Indigenous Peoples Day.
So I'm going to take a liberty, if I may, to just make a comment myself. And to say that, to just kind of follow up with this conversation, that it's hard work. It's hard work to engage the song of another who comes from a different cultural background. And it's risk-taking. And you might make mistakes. I know I have, and some of those mistakes have been painful. So, but I want to just share a little story about an engagement that I'm presently involved in. There's a song in the in More Voices and the new Anglican supplement. I was on the committee and I can't think of the name. Sing a New Creation. Okay, there you go. I presented on it last year, but and it's called All One People, and it's by somebody that I suggested the song for the Anglican supplement without knowing the people who wrote it, who are Joseph Natauhau and Cheryl Lirondelle, and they're from the Saskatoon area. Joseph is a Cree, Plains Cree man. And I've come to know him since living there, and I decided that I wanted to learn the song from him. So I asked him to teach it to me. And we sang it together at a worship event about a month ago. And I learned how to sing it in Cree with his guidance. And, we do it different ways and stuff. And he said, well, like 2 seconds before we were going to sing it, he said, why don't we start with a little bit of a cappella right at the beginning? So I was like, okay, right. And then we're up in front of the people and he says, he's funny. He said, okay, you start. And I was like, no way. I said no. Like he's a knowledge keeper for the university, and he's like kind of royalty around there. And I could not believe it. Like 2 seconds before we're singing, I'm saying no to him because I was not ready to start it. Anyhow, but I still feel like I haven't learned the song fully. So I'm still gonna sing with him, and we're gonna continue to develop our friendship. And it's long, beautiful work, sometimes hard, and it requires sustained relationship with people from cultural traditions whose songs you're singing. So I just wanted to put that out there. And now I'm going to ask Matt a question, and maybe I'll just say also we're hoping to open it up for questions, and we'll let the conversation free roll a bit once we're done with our planned questions as well. So that's kind of what we're doing. So Matt, the role of the music director has evolved significantly in recent decades. Oh, that's Jason. Oops, sorry. Okay. As Canadians, we can sometimes feel a bit jealous, y'all, of our American counterparts who have more church music programs in their colleges and universities than we do, and they are better endowed. At the denominational level, we also struggle. That might be a surprise to some of you, but it's the truth. The denominational level, we also struggle with support for worship and liturgy, not to mention church music. The handful of programs that we have here in Canada are small, and many of them are shrinking, as Anneli said. So, to you, how are we training leaders for congregational song, especially recognizing diverse communities? These questions are all 2 questions, anyhow. Good luck with this, Matt. Where is the instruction happening, and what impact does this have on community worship?
First, I'd like to say, that there are institutions as well that are supporting this. But first of all, it's what we can do as well. I think our future are our youth, and if the funds are not as heavily supported as Becca was just mentioning, but how we can foster within our own congregation support someone that we can mentor in our own church context. People learn as well through experience, and that's something that I think we can do better in supporting the youth in terms of how we're offering opportunities in worship, whether that's supporting through various aspects of the worshiping life, how they can be involved in worship planning and what that looks like together. Academically, we, as Anneli just mentioned, we have the Emmanuel College's Masters of Sacred Music program, and Andrew Aitchison is here as well, admissions. So if you have more questions about that as well, that is supporting the life of the church, and it's specifically rooted in the United Church context. In that front, I know we have various training aspects musically and practically, but in specific areas. For example, we have the Hymn Society that is supportive in this congregational song. Those who are looking to support songwriting workshops, we have these little workshops. We have the RCCO that just did the Organ Festival in Toronto. There's specifically in my context in the United Church, we also have the Music United conference as well that looks at various aspects of as a church musician. And also, I think more importantly, we also have the Summer Institute of Church Music that happens as well in July. And so look forward to that next year. We were just in a discerning and visioning process this year. And so that's something that we have in Canada that supports the breadth of church music. Just some of the things that we have going around. But yeah, those are some of the thoughts that I have. There are some funds to support that in terms of especially if you're a first timer in some of these conferences, something to look forward to, and just reach out. I think, but most importantly, it's what we do as church musicians and how we can support and offer opportunities to our youth, to our communities that are looking for opportunities but are not getting them.
Becca already said this first sentence, but it's going to shock you, so I'll read it again. The role of music minister has evolved significantly in recent decades. I don't know if you guys knew that. While some full-time positions still exist, many contracts are for 10 hours a week or less. Music ministry programs are being defunded, both at the congregational level and at the level of national churches. So Jason, no pressure. How can we move to inspire denominations to acknowledge the crucial role that church musicians have and will continue to play in the health of congregations across Canada? And what can we as colleagues and the Hymn Society do to support each other in enlivening congregational song in Canada?
Yeah, every one of these questions is like an hour. I was speaking with a couple people on our church board a few months ago, and we were talking a bit about our church community, the music program there, what's going on. And I said, what would it look like if we took our budget, our music budgets, and we flipped the money that we invested in adult music ministry into children's music ministry, and asked our adults to survive on a children's ministry budget for a year? And I'm really curious about how we are trying to engage with and inspire those young ones in our midst who are open to and curious and interested in what we're doing in church, but for whom, frankly, there's just less resource. We have less people working with them. We have less spaces for them. We have less leaders for them. And I was helping two churches who were doing an amalgamation. They asked me to come and do some work with their job description. They were making it into one. And I gave them a list. I didn't give them a list. I asked them to make a list of what all their priorities might be in a new position. And I added a few things of my own to their list, and then I asked them to rank those things from most to least important. And in the top 10 things that were most important, there was not a single children's ministry. And it strikes me that if we are going to continue to find ways to grow our spaces, it's not only around the content that we have, but it's how do we connect with new families, young people, children, people who are new to faith. How do we give them a space where they feel like what we're doing is not just gratifying, spiritually connecting, but also fun and engaging. And it's a place people want to go. They want to line up. They're going to come in. There's going to be dinner. There's going to be, the kids are going to learn music. There's going to be, how are we going to do that? And I'm concerned because I think churches like schools and other spaces that tend to be run by people who are well-meaning, but not necessarily altogether with it when it comes to, it's easy to cut music. It's easy to cut art. It's easy to cut those things that bring life into the spaces where we are. And our denominations have been just as guilty of doing it as other social government-funded places, community centers have been, and schools. And the problem with that is when denominations do that and they save money, then churches see that as a model, and then they start doing it to save money. And I don't have any strict research yet. Maybe it's like a DMA project or a DMIN project, but I'm pretty sure that there's a direct correlation between defunding and scrapping music programs and the demise of our church. If we can't invest into the kinds of programs that are helping people to connect spiritually and with each other in ways that are going to we wonder why we have some of these sort of hopeless feeling winding roads, and it's kind of there in front of us. And I suspect if we could engage in the faithful act of making sure that the programs that we have are well funded, it would in the long run come out to our positive for the whole church. Actually, this is not just a one denomination's problem. I think it's a corporate problem. So I don't know, how do we as communities of faith do that when our budgets are shrinking and they're small and they're suffering and they're hard? I'm not sure how we can be creative, but there's got to be a way to do it. There's got to be a smart way for us as congregational song leaders, as organizations, to begin to use our collective intelligence to say, hold on, there's got to be a way to make this happen. If we aren't able to do that piece of it, and if we can't be in control of our own destiny, which many of us are not when people are making decisions where we don't sometimes even have a seat at the table, we are kind of victims of what's happening around us. And I wonder how we can take some of the agency back. And so that loops around to the children's piece. If we can help our programs to be vibrant, like give people a reason to look and say, oh my gosh, that's working. How can we deny that? Oh my gosh, look, people are showing up. How can we deny that this is? And for most people, music, I went to a university which was a Christian university, and most of my schoolmates are not in church anymore. They didn't train to be church leaders in the end. They left the church. They're disenfranchised with the church. But they're not spiritual people. It's not like they don't care about church or faith or God or any of those things. They're disenfranchised with some of the rules, with the things that are making it hard. And so they're way more likely to come because they know there's something musical happening in church, and then that point of connection speaks to them, than they are because there's an awesome lecturer. I love lectures, no offense to lectures or preaching or any of those other things. They're all an amazingly important central part of what we're doing. But how can we make sure that this music piece is sustainable? And I think we have to be very creative, very quick, and we have to make sure that we are investing in the young ones in our space so that there's a future there for us. We really need that, I think.
So There's lots more that we could say, but I think what we wanted to do was open the space for people to ask questions. And I'm looking at Brian, trying to figure out the best. Maybe if you have a question, Hillary will repeat questions into the mic for our online participants. If you want to direct your question, you can, or if you want to ask a general question, we'll just see who wants to answer it. Or actually, Jonathan was saying before, he prefers Q&R, question and response, because this is an ongoing conversation. Right back there.
Okay.
Working in the U.S. context, talk a lot about the challenges that the largest church music entities in the contemporary worship space have on churches in the U.S. I wonder if you could comment on the impact of kind of the mega worship music industry on Canadian worship, perhaps even an independent about evangelicals in Canada.
So Adam is asking, saying that he works in a context in the States around evangelical and charismatic contexts and the megachurch context, and how do we see that spill over into Canada, if applicable, and what does that do?
I grew up as an evangelical. Most of my family is evangelical. I have great love for many of the aspects of the evangelical church. I'm a recovering person myself. As a queer person, it wasn't my space, but there's lots that the church can learn from the evangelical movement. I think that in Canada, at least, I'm not an authority on this. Okay, so I'm just going to give you some of my my observations. The larger churches in our spaces, they had the effect of being exciting and joyful, and people were drawn to them. They often ended up sucking people from mainline denominations into that larger, more energetic space, and so impoverishing smaller communities. So, and then when those spaces crumble, then people are left kind of shipwrecked in faith, because depending on how well they did with offering a lot of substance, there were other cultural baggage along with that. So I don't know how different that is from the American context, but that's at least one observation I can make.
Good. Yeah, I agree with that. And I'd like to say that from my earlier exhortation, it's that if you don't want to lose your people, then let's get exciting. Start singing the songs and writing the songs that your congregations need to hear, because, you know, if you want a Big Mac, you can find one anywhere in the world. If you want a worship song, you can find those mega church songs. Every congregation is singing them. And it's exciting and it's drawing. But I don't believe that those songs are for every congregation. And I believe that the congregations that are adapting them are doing it for the same reason that the people are flocking to those other churches. I think the fact that we need to write songs by the Holy Spirit that is going to affect our local congregations, our regions. And that's where we're going to take back what the enemy has stolen from us. When our people leave to go chase that, I believe that's a false thing. I believe that we need to do this in a way where we're drawing. Let me just say one other thing too. I had something here. In regarding to what I was speaking about before, if there's anything I learned about reconciliation, so it's all of these things all add up to making our places wholesome and genuine, our churches and our denominations, because we've tried doing it the institutional way. Now I think we got to do it the organic way, the holistic way, the way that appeals to how people are acting in this modern society. And one of the things I've found is reconciliation is not a public thing, it's a personal thing. And we do reconciliation in a public way, and that's great, but that is supposed to be an example for what's supposed to take place in the private, in the personal thing among us, in our communities and our churches. And we have gotten ourselves into this thing that the church is the only place you can reconcile, so you get up and you do it. But what it needs to be done is taken into that personal place. So in public, how we must teach how to represent an example of how we can handle reconciliation in private. And I believe that it all speaks to this whole thing that we're aiming at right now. You know, so I inspire you. I just want to inspire you to begin to write. Begin to write. I know you guys, I know you musicians out there have your little books, right? You have your little book that nobody else sees, it's hidden. And you've written all these great things, your theological things that you want to say, but you never get to say, and you're going to die, and the book's going to be tucked in the casket beside you. Or, what's the other choice? You can pull out that book and use all this wonderful musical expertise you have and begin to pen and write and sing the songs that are going to save the church. I believe that. I believe that those songs are what's going to save the church, because I've seen songs inspire. I sang over in China, and there was like 300 people there. And I sang one of my flagship songs called Rise Up Mighty Warrior. And the elders way in the back didn't understand a word I was saying. They sent the interpreter up to ask me, why when I sang did they feel it in here? I said, because I'm singing to honor the one who created me. And they went and told, and they said, well, why do you want to sing to him? They sent him back up. I said, because he sent his son to die for me so I could be set free from my sins. And he went back and told him. And that sparked this thing where they were following me around China in different places I was going, saying, that's the guy, that's the guy. And so they'd come up in parking lots and places and ask me more about that. I mean, our music is powerful. The music that you guys sing is powerful, but bring the new stuff on. Bring it on. Bring it on.
I think piggybacking off of what Jonathan's saying too, and looping in contemporary worship music in a Canadian context, I think I would say one of the things that has been difficult in a Canadian context is holding this need for reconciliation, these progressive social values, this desire to engage all these diverse communities. And there has been maybe a little bit of a movement that in order to do that, we move away from popular musical influence. And there's kind of, these are two separate things. Whereas what we see is that they are not two separate things. And if I look at what the Ethiopian Mennonite congregation in Ottawa is singing, it's not what we often peg that as. And so we talked a little bit in the kind of pre-meeting about the tension between these things. And I think I love what you're saying, Jonathan, about singing these new songs and in the ways that those come up for us, and letting those be whatever the musical style is, letting that feel authentic, even though it is apart from this kind of industry that often has a huge part in Canadian context. I think very similar to how it is in the States, except none of the artists come here on tour, which is devastating. But there is, we really are part of the same. We piggyback on the same industry, and so feeling like let's empower ourselves to move beyond that too, and use that style, but to write the songs that resonate for us. Mm-hmm. Yeah, question there.
such a way that I don't have to maybe like read an essay before we sing each song, like trying to keep the, like very practically, the flow of worship going, but also honoring that this is not my heritage from which I'm teaching. So like what is the rightest way? Is there a rightest way to do that?
Just to repeat the question. So a question coming from someone who's in a Manitoba Mennonite context, predominantly white cultural context, where it does feel culturally like a stretch to explore music from different cultural contexts, even though there is the desire there. So what does it look like to be attentive to the flow of worship, but bring the context that's needed to whatever new exploration that might be? And is there a right or wrong way to do that? Is there one right way to do that?
Thanks for the question, because that would have been the other 30 minutes of my talk. First off, I think the right way, in air quotes, is that you do this with sincere intention. You're not doing it in to show that you're woke or whatever, you know. How to manage the tyranny of time, right? Because there is a huge context that comes with every song. But I think what you do is something I've seen Becca do and I've seen Bruce do. When you're introducing a new song, explain where you got it, how it came to you. Recognize the origins of the song. And you can usually do that in a minute or two at the most. And then you have the aid. I mean, it's very short form. It's not the whole thing, but it's a start. If you have the ability to publish bulletin notes or in a weekly or biweekly communication to your congregation, you can fill in some of that background. And a lot of people will read it, not everyone, but a lot will. And then over time, I mean, you can't just teach a song once, right? And then come back to it 6 months later, because it'll be different people in the pews and they won't remember it from the first time, the ones who were there. So it's got to be intentional and interjectional, you know? You learn one thing, you keep using it, and you introduce something else so that over time you can grow the body of repertoire. But it is a real challenge, and I go through this in my own head all the time too. So thank you for the question.
I have a couple things to add, just practically. So I think there's a way to introduce the song by in an educational mode. You can also do it through prayer, with a mindfulness about the people whose song you're singing and holding them in prayer as you begin the song. I would say, are there people from that community who live in your neighborhood? Can they be invited to come in and lead with you or teach your choir? How can you engage with people from that cultural tradition? So how can you build relationship? How can the culture of that community be integrated into the rest of the worship service with a reading or a poem from that community, or some reference to it in the sermon, which leads to the relationship that we have with clergy, right? So how do we get clergy on board with doing that? How do we take that musical ministry and worship ministry into actual justice work with those communities in our that live with us and that live beyond us in other parts of the world? So how do we work with children to teach children about the struggles of justice of that particular cultural work? So just how do we add on to all of those things? And that gives it there's always risk in doing it, I think, but how do we deepen the engagement and deepen relationship? I think, to me, relationship is key. So how do we strengthen that and build on that? Yeah.
Take a risk. I was just at a Mennonite church in Winnipeg. I don't know, guess it wasn't yours. Because you would have known, right? Mouthy Mohawk, right? No, this church invited me in. And, he said, can you come and do a couple songs? I said, no. I said, it's impossible. I'm not going to dedicate my time to come and give you a token 2 songs. If you want me to come, I'm going to speak and I'm going to sing. And he took a risk. The pastor took a risk, the Mennonite pastor. And he was so glad he did, because we became friends. There was a sense of freedom that was released within the church. And I went on my way. But I just think that it's important, we get, I love what denominationalism has done in some ways, in that they've kept the name of Jesus Christ in the front, but there's so many other things that and the bondages that come from it have slowed up what we can do. And I think it's time. I'm not speaking about rebellion here, but I am speaking about taking a risk to do what you need to do. So, Becca just gave some really good suggestions on getting the community involved, and by doing that, recognizing the souls that are around us and the purpose and why we might take that risk.
I think so.
All right. Brian came down. We know what that means. It might mean that he's going to tell some more bad jokes.
No.
So maybe we should keep talking. But
No, let's thank our panel.